Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome back to day number 2 of Paragon Bootcamp. We are moving into our magic lecture today, and we have a very special guest with us. He is hailing from the Emerald Hills. He is a Paragon, Bard, Druid, Healer, and Wizard. Yes, the full Paragon caster suite, presenting to you all the information you need to know about playing a magic caster in Amtgard. I present to you Mabtik the Magnificent.
Good afternoon, everybody. As he said, my name is Mabtik the Magnificent. You can also find me on Facebook as Andrew Maher. That's Maher for that last bit. I'll take messages there. If you have any questions after the class, please feel free to message me there or via email. Email is mabtik@gmail.com. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start with some very basic bits of magic casting before I get to the individual spellcasters at the end. One of the things I always like to cover when I'm talking about magic, particularly to other magic casters or people that have questions, is that this game operates on a system of hard and soft counters. There's very rarely in a situation where you're always going to win, and very rarely a situation in which you're always going to lose. This is important because that means, for instance, even if you're a new player playing Wizard and you encounter a higher level Monk, which is the traditional anti-magic class according to most people in the game, you still have a chance of winning. So the game isn't rock, paper, scissors, it's hard and soft counters. On top of that, you also have to remember that you can affect the field without actually doing anything. So as you move up and you are on the field and you're playing a caster, you've got your shiny sash out there, red, yellow, blue, brown, whatever it may be. The enemy has to react to you. So if you can place yourself in a spot where most of the people you're looking at are people that can't deal well with magic, you can exert your effort on the field without needing to actually get rid of any of your spellcasting resources. You don't have to throw away a spell ball, you don't have to use a verbal, just your sheer presence on the field and the fact that they know which class you're playing and which class they are playing means that you can start influencing how they react to things. A lot of this is due to the fact that casters do have one very large advantage over all of the melee classes and the other casters that they're facing off with. A spellcaster's spell list is not visible. Unless you are playing something like Battle Mage, who has no spell balls and they can see that, or Evoker, who has all of the spell balls and they can see that, your abilities are hidden from them until you use them outside of what they know your class gets. And on top of that, you can tailor that ability to what you see during team picks, depending on your kingdom and event. I know some places check lists before you split teams, some places after, etc. But either way, you should be able to identify, at the very least, what the game rules are before you pick your spells, and then you make your spell list. I cannot emphasize that enough. You always want to try and make your spell list at the very least after you know what the game rules are. This is important for virtually all of the spellcasters. If you're playing a healer and there's instant respawn, you may not need to invest very heavily in your ability to resurrect people because they just tag in, run back in, and they didn't need you to run through the entire resin camp plus the recharge, etc. The same thing holds true for, say, a warlock. If there's instant respawns again, Finger of Death may not be your best choice. You can probably get away with just tagging them with a crowd control and either getting them to call dead or holding them in place for longer via that crowd control if they don't want to call dead. So the next thing I like to cover is the types of people you are going to encounter on the field and how you want to deal with them. So you're going to encounter 3 groups of players: experienced players, new players, and one that kind of bridges the gap between both depending on where you are, popular players. I include popular players for a specific reason, and I'll get to that in a minute. But experienced players and new players both have different ways you have to identify them and respond to them. If you're dealing with a large group of experienced players, you need to play generally more conservatively. If you try and push hard, play the superhero, that sort of thing, particularly in V8, you're going to run into problems. The experienced players will recognize the restrictions of magic casting that can be exploited to outweigh the benefits if you just try to dive into them and solo your way through that entire crowd. New players have the opposite problem. They don't recognize them, and they may accidentally overturn your plans just because they don't know any better. Now, with the new players, you do have the advantage that frequently they're not going to work together very well. Experienced players are going to work together well, even if they don't know each other, just because they know how the game functions. They won't be a perfect organized team, but they're going to work together more often than not. New players won't. You can probably get them to run at you, action hero style, where you get to fight one minion at a time, and it makes you look really awesome, and it gets you through to the other side, but you might be a bit tired once you're done, either from pointing and casting or throwing spell balls or having to fight or all 3 at the same time, depending on what you're playing. I put popular players in their own category because dealing with them works the same as as experienced and new players, but you have the benefit of people know who that is. So if you can find a very popular and well-known player who's known for being skilled, and you can just lock them down, it can frequently demoralize the enemy team just because they see that one of their key players isn't able to help them. Also, it stops your team from attacking them over and over and over and over again. One of the most frustrating things for me on the field is there are certain popular players that people want to go and challenge in the middle of a battle game, which is great and all. You want to get better, you want to challenge someone who's top dog, that sort of thing, whatever. I don't really care. I'm focused on the objective. So if you can, say, ice ball that popular player so that your team can't hit them, they'll go find something more useful to do than lining up to fight one person. I also tend to favor heavy crowd control or hard crowd control like ice ball and stun for dealing with these people because it stops them from talking. If they cannot scream for help or get their team to come help them or attack you or direct their team otherwise, you've also neutralized that influence they tend to have on the field because people listen to popular players and you don't want them to. Now, the last thing you're going to end up looking at when it comes to that sort of thing is positioning. There are a number of things to talk about when it comes to positioning. It breaks into roughly 2 categories of good and bad. There are good spots to stand and bad spots to stand. And each field and every moment on that field all have vastly different concerns that you need to be looking at. Particularly as a spellcaster, you need to concern yourself with where the objectives are and what sort of cover is on the field. Now, here, when I talk about cover, I'm talking about anything that will prevent you from hitting them with a spell ball and anything that breaks line of sight. It's not exactly the perfect traditional definition of cover, however, it works well enough for our game. So if there are walls in the field, you need to mentally mark where those are. Sometimes if you're focused on one player and you're trying to attack them and spell at them and herd them into a particular direction, and you're not paying attention to where you are, suddenly they break behind the wall and you can't target them anymore, and you're potentially out of position because you're close to that wall, and if they have teammates behind it, they may come right back out from behind that wall, but with more people than you can handle. You want to make sure you're paying attention to where that wall is so that you can avoid doing that sort of thing. Same thing with trees. There's less risk of a bunch of people popping out from behind the tree, but if they can break line of sight at the very end of your spell, which is really the only spot where range and line of sight matter, you lose the spell, and they don't take the effect because they weren't a legal target when you completed it. So you want to make sure that they're not able to break off and jump behind a tree, the wall, etc. Objectives are also important because sometimes you'll be pursuing somebody or working against a chunk of the enemy's team and they're just backing away, which feels great. You're, oh, look, all these people are running away from me. All these people are trying to get away from me and they're not really paying much attention to what I'm doing. However, if they're pulling you further and further and further away from the objective, taking that ground is useless. Are almost useless. There may be the ability to launch a flank attack or set up a safe resurrection point over there, but in the grand scheme of things, it's mostly useless because it's away from the objective. It's pulling you more than likely out of the line between your respawn, their respawn, and hopefully with the objective somewhere in the middle of those two things. And if you're in that area, way off on the side, and they manage to kill you, you're probably not getting a res anytime soon because you have to walk all the way back to respawn. And if you're using spell balls, your equipment's scattered out there. So you want to avoid letting them pull you off into an inconsequential corner of the field where you're just going to lose what you have or what was there. It is good if you can kill people there because obviously they have all the same problems you just had, but we're more concerned with our personal positioning first and someone else's positioning second. The other two things you need to be aware of are, like I was just saying, where your enemy is and where your friends are. If you can convince your friends to make concerted attacks on the objectives and make sure that you have the enemy bottled up behind your friends' line, you're in a much better position than if everybody is scattered everywhere and you're not doing very well. Now, as a general rule of thumb, when I am talking about good positioning, I am talking about positioning in which you, the player, are shielded as much as possible from enemy attack, but in a good position to exert your will on the field. For a spellcaster, this normally means you're within about 20 feet of the enemy, but they can't hit you in melee. So the second line right behind your allies, unless you're using 50-foot spells or extending them, or if you've got one heck of a spell ball arm. Personally, I don't. My spell balls are for the 20 to 40-foot range. They're mostly defensive unless I'm pushing forward hard, but we'll get to that later when I'm talking about specific classes and how to use things. Also, for some casters, like healers and bard, that safe good position may be, depending on what type of spell list you're running, all the way back at base. You're safe from harm, you're where you need to be to recharge people's abilities or resurrect them. You're also in a spot where your allies know where to find you. And in a spot where the enemies know where you are, but they know they can't safely get to you. In the case of if you're one of our warrior friends, this good position is often in a spot where your flanks are protected, you may be enchanted or otherwise supported against magical effects, and you can reach the enemy with your weapon, and they can't easily reach you with theirs without putting themselves at risk. It's pretty basic, but it's something in my experience a lot of people don't think about. You'll get that that group of people that create a wedge shape as they're pushing forward, and all of those people on that tip of that wedge, they need to be there to push, but if they're not being supported on their flanks, they're really easy for you to help your team deal with. You use spells on the people at the point or the people with the most magic ability or enchantments, stick whatever you identify as the highest threat on the end of that wedge, and you let your team chop the rest of them up while they're unsupported. Oh no, there went a whole group of people, and now their line is weaker because they lost all those people. Which leads us directly into bad positioning. In this case, we're talking about positions that leave you, the player, exposed in part or in totality to enemy action, whether that is spells, arrows, thrown. I will take questions at the end, but I see that there. Thank you. And in general, you don't have a way to either avoid those attacks, as I said, or defend yourself against them. So if someone pulls you out on the flank and they've got a bunch of archers behind, off on their side. Now those archers are shooting into your side and back, which is a significantly more difficult shot to block or dodge because you have to concern yourself with the person in front of you, but also the attack coming from back over there, which is not, they are not easy things to simultaneously work on. Now, the factor that I look at most frequently as the thing that divides good players from great players and great players from people I want to play with all the time is field awareness. This is something that comes directly out of positioning and feeds back into positioning. They're things that you want to be aware of. They're very, very important for Magic users. You absolutely need to work on field awareness as one of your top things, because you don't need to be the fastest speaker. You don't need to be the fastest caster or the most accurate person with a spell ball or have a perfect list. If you can consistently place yourself in a position that allows you to use what you do have to absolute maximum advantage. Like I said, good positioning. But to get there, we must be aware of the field and how to get there. For my personal usages, I tend to divide field awareness into 3 distinct categories, and they kind of go in order from top to bottom and just go in a loop over and over again. So first, I observe the field, which is literally just look. You look around. You need to be able to see or identify from what you can see the following things pretty quickly. The game objective. If you can't see the game objective from where you are, you have a problem. If you can't identify where the game objective is from where you are as a secondary thing, so let's say the game objective is a small ball and it could be held by somebody, you probably can't see it. But if you can't identify where it is on the field by who you can see and how they're behaving, you run into the problem of you don't know what to do. Sure, you can just go out there and treat it like it's a class ditch or, just a large scrum where you're just casting at whoever comes first, but you should be always working towards the objective. This is a team game, and the objective is how we score points and how we win. And in my opinion, most of the time, that's what we should be spending our energy on, either getting to the objective or preventing the enemy from getting to the objective. So obviously, first thing you want to be able to see. The next thing you want to be able to see are the respawn locations. This is slightly deceptive. You're not actually looking for the respawn location. You're looking to see how many people are there. If there are a bunch of people in your respawn location that are all identified as your team, you might have a problem in which the enemy is conducting a successful push right now, and you should be more focused on preventing them from reaching their objective than working to achieve your objective until your team respawns. The reverse is also true. If the enemy team is mostly in the respawn area, you may want to push forward and help your team work towards the objective, but you also need to be aware of what the respawn mechanics are so that the respawning wave of the enemy players doesn't surprise you. There's nothing worse than overextending straight into the enemy respawn, having their whole team spawn on top of you fresh, and you get murdered. There's no spells that will help you get out of that, save for a swift teleport or something like that, and that doesn't really help you get out of the situation so much as reset it. The next thing, as I said, once you're looking around, you identify it. You identify not the items you were looking for, but you identify the causes of that. If the enemy is conducting a successful push, you need to identify why. Odds are good that they have some strong players at the forefront of their push or just behind it, organizing it. And you need to be able to identify them. And then once you have identified them, which spells you're going to use in order to help solve that problem. Again, we're talking about magic, not necessarily stick. So what we're looking for is who is the problem player on the enemy team, not in the negative way of like, oh, that person's not fun to play with, but oh, that person's wrecking my team. So then we shuffle through and go, okay, how can I help my team deal with that person? You select the correct spells, or you come up with a plan, and you implement it, which is actually the third thing. Once you've identified what's causing the problems on the field and what you can do to fix that problem, you implement. After you've implemented, that's kind of a coin toss. The coin toss here is that the enemy is doing the same thing ideally, so now we're seeing who came up with the better plan, or who reacts to people interrupting their plan more efficiently than the other. Because there's a old saying, no plan survives first contact, and it's very, very, very true. Now, when I'm formulating things and I'm trying to identify who I need to deal with, I break things into three prioritizing levels of targets. This is a pretty hard set list because in all of the time I have spent playing spellcasters, it has remained true regardless of which spellcaster I was playing, regardless of what role in the field I was fulfilling, regardless of what the objective was. There are certain people you need to remove from the enemy's team first for as long as you can and work your way down. The first person you always need to look for is who's giving the effective orders. Which people on the enemy team are doing a good job of coordinating their team. Also the people in your team, because depending on what your role is, you may want to protect these people. If you're playing a defensive caster, you want to identify the people on your team that are helping you. They're directing your team. They're convincing the players that normally don't work together to work together. All of those things that you're like, wow, that guy's really good at giving orders and coming up with plans, and he convinces people. Yeah, if he's on your team, you want to protect that guy. If he's on the enemy team, you want him spending as much time as you can in respawn or standing around in crowd control that prevents him from talking. Because without that guy there, it is significantly easier to get rid of the enemy team, stop what they're planning to do, and just basically turn them into a bunch of chickens running around with their heads cut off because they don't know what to do. You know, they're still dangerous, they can still hit you and stuff, but they're not working towards the objective. The objective is how we win the game. And once they stop working towards it, you're essentially in a position of where you might not win, but they can't, or you might not, say, how do we phrase this? Once they have stopped working towards the objective, they're in a position where they can't win, which means you can't lose. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win, because if you don't work towards the objective also, well, then you both lose because there's a tie and nobody wins anything. The second group of people that you always want to either protect or remove are the support elements. These are the people that are running around removing spell effects. You know, if you've got a player who's frozen, he's the guy who runs, or she is the person that runs up, uses release or greater release, gets that player back in the fight. Same thing with stopped or suppressed or awe. Any of those things, these are those players doing that. They're also the players who are defending somebody else. You know, if you've got someone who's just providing a good bulwark while someone else is casting from behind them, that bulwark player is a support element. And then finally, they're the people that are repairing equipment with mend, recharging expended abilities with confidence, or returning players from being dead to life. All of these players get paid with the same thing: death. You want them dead. You want them not doing anything on the field if they're on the enemy team. If they're on your team, you want to be the guy who's protecting them. And then the third group are the top fighters, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but in my experience, it's easier to sideline them and distract them with some people to fight than it is to deal with them directly. And also, they're the top person that the leaders are going to try and keep protected by giving orders to release them. And they're the top person. The support elements are going to be focused on keeping alive and fighting. So if you ice ball or lightning bolt that top player to get them stopped or frozen, and the support elements see that, they're going to be released very, very quickly. Probably more quickly than you can recharge your ability to attack them. And now you're right back to where you started. And all it did was momentarily pause what that player was doing to wreck your line. So we really want to make sure that they can't come back, which means at the very least you'd hit the support players before you hit the top fighters, just to make sure they don't bring them back. Let's see. All right. So, how do we identify those top players? That's fairly easy. They're normally the person that's wrecking your team. You can normally tell what they're best at by the method that they choose to wreck your team. Frequently, it's going to fall into one of two categories: weapons or magic, because that's how our game functions. They're either going to use weapons or they're going to use magic, and that's how they're going to deal with your team. And normally, you want to pick the opposite option. If they're really good with weapons, you want to stop them with magic. If they're really good with magic, that's a little bit more fuzzy, but generally sending someone who's really good with weapons at them will give you a decent result, particularly if you can distract them with the rest of your team to deal with. All right, so how do we distract those players? As casters, we have a couple of options. My favorite option is if they have decent cardio, find a necromancer and turn them all into undead minions. Sure, they're fragile, but they're probably going to get smacked in the chest a lot frequently if they're, low skill players. And if they're not, we can shift to one of the other methods and use, say, enchantments. Not granted, undead minion is an enchantment, but I'm talking about things like stone skin, golem, essence graft, flame blade, iron skin. Give them a full stack, send them out there, that sort of thing. One of my favorite things about all of these enchantments is that if you pick the right ones for the player that is you're enchanting, you can help them cover up a lot of gaps in their defenses. One of the really obvious ones is you can drop flame blade, attuned, and iron skin on a monk, and now they don't have to worry about spell balls that get through their guard. They have armor to deal with other melee people. Their weapons are immune to flame, so they don't have to worry about as many things breaking or heating them or shattering them, that sort of thing. Although they're immune to a lot of that depending on circumstance, just by nature of being a monk. But again, those enchantments help them prolong their ability to be a wretched pain to deal with as a spellcaster, and even for other melee people. Same thing with a warrior. If you can get, say, Enlightened Soul onto a warrior, they're going to have a lot easier of a time holding their spot in the line because they now don't have to worry about verbals, and their ancestral armor helps them deal with spell walls. So I'm going to do a quick thumbnail description of how I think of most of the classes in general, and then I'm going to launch into discussing the various types of spellcaster and how I look at them and what I do with them. This is pretty much going to go in order from A to Z open classes, and then we'll discuss the closed classes after that. So first up are archers. When I'm looking at them as a spellcaster, I try to keep in mind that they do or can have armor up to 2 points, which means that even if you get close to them, it's not a guaranteed thing that you can smack them with your dagger or your short sword or whatever weapon you're using to quickly deal with them. Same thing if you have a spell ball. Some spell balls are stopped by armor. For instance, Force Bolt is going to, it'll destroy the armor or break it, but it's not going to go through and wound them if they're actually bothering to wear armor. The upside of this is they only get short swords and daggers for melee, so odds are good they're on pretty even footing with the vast majority of spellcasters out there when it gets to melee as far as weapons go, because those are the weapons you see most spellcasters with. They're the weapons I use most of the time when I'm playing pretty much anything but Druid, and that's just how that breaks down. They do get bows and crossbows, and they are the only class with specialty arrows. This is important. You have to remember this because specialty arrows does include suppression arrow, and that is engulfing unless I am misremembering things from the last time we got to play about a year ago. And that will stop your spell casting. And that's what we're here for, is to cast spells. And if you can't cast spells, whoops, you're just an unarmored dude with a stick most of the time. Well, an unarmored person. By default, they are the best class at the very longest ranges of engagement because they have that bow or that crossbow and specialty arrows. You can kind of start contesting them with extended verbals once you get within 50 feet, or honestly from outside 50 feet. If you extend ambulance something and run in screaming it, you can finish at the 50-foot mark and hopefully hit them before they shoot you. Or if you've got a really good arm with spell balls and your spell balls are constructed to help fly that far, you're going to be able to deal with them. But by default, I normally ignore sort of archers for the most part. They are on the other side of the line from me in the vast majority of field positioning. And if I want to clear a bunch of archers out of a spot, I'll take a couple people with me so that I can stand behind them and release them while the archer has to deal with that person in front of me. I can chunk a spell ball over that pair of people, or just throw verbals from that relatively protected position. In general, though, you can just push them away from where they want to stand by moving up with that trio, 2 or 3 people like that. Assassins. Assassins are annoying. Not because they kill me a lot, but because they have so many escape mechanics that they can lean heavily into, particularly if they have a bard to return per life abilities. This means you have to be ready to deal with insubstantial, and not every casting class has a good answer for an insubstantial enemy, particularly ones that can move. So you want to be aware of that. It may be less of an occasion where you have to worry about them killing you, and more of an occasion where you're worried about them either popping out and murdering your friends, or popping out and dealing with the objective. Capture the Flag, for instance, is a game I really, really enjoy at the local level, and frequently assassins will just blink and hang out kind of near the flag so they can drop out a blink, grab the flag, and go running up the field and to bring the flag back, and they got there pretty safely through their per life and insubstantial abilities. And since they can wear armor, they're not as easy to deal with as they run away as someone who is unarmored, provided, again, they're wearing it. I tend to make the assumption when I'm talking about Amtgard in the theoretical sense that everybody is wearing what their class allows them to wear, and that they're roughly of average skill, because that's what the rules assume. We're not talking about someone who skews heavily on the skill chart or the equipment chart to be unusual. You just can't make plans for that on the general scale. You have to do that specifically for that person that you know is there. One of the notable things about assassins is coup de grace, and that's one of those things where I think it's the only ability in the game that if they start it while you're wounded and you're healed by the end, you're dead, regardless. So you have to be aware of that relatively odd interaction. It checks for the validity of that at the start rather than the end. So if you're wounded and the assassin decides that he wants you dead, you're probably dead unless they've already used that ability. Barbarians. Barbarians are the first real mid-field player we're going to talk about here, with 3 points of armor, a number of melee abilities. The most annoying ability they have for particularly bards and healers is their immunity to command and subdual. This makes them immune to virtually everything those two classes have. Not everything, but virtually everything. Shove, stun, and for the healer, and in the case of the bard, tear. Pretty much the only 3 things that those two classes have to deal with that particular class. So they're really good at hunting them. So if you're playing healer or bard, you want to keep an eye out for the barbarians and make sure that none of them get the idea that, hey, wait, I'm immune to most of what he can do, I'm just going to charge that guy. Or you want to keep a large number of things to deal with him while handy. A friendly barbarian, one of the things you can do is what's locally referred to as the barbar bomb. I don't know if it has the same name everywhere else, but you basically just teleport them in somewhere. They know they're going to die, but the moment they get murdered, they pop fight after death and cause that entire area to just explode outward trying to get away. If you were on the defensive against something like this, and you were playing a healer or a bard, again, we're going to talk about those two a lot because in relation to the barbarian, they have the most interactions that are interesting. You can use Greater Release to remove Fight After Death from them. If they hear it, again, you have the problem of they're shouting numbers, you're shouting verbals, everybody else is shouting run away, screaming and dying, so they may not hear you use greater release. The other casters can try and use something like Icy Blast on them before they're murdered, so that they're less likely to use their fight after death. But if a guy runs at you like this and you hit him in the chest and he has no armor, frequently that's what happens the moment they want to do that. I haven't really seen it happen, but if they bring a whole bunch of rocks, they can do a fairly, they could in theory do a fair number against your friend's shields or your shields, so you're going to want to bring some mins. Monks. As a spellcaster, when I look across the field and I see monks, it really depends on who I'm playing, but they are the ones I want to try and keep a mental tally on where they are. If they come up with me with an enchantment stack, they're often, it's easier for me to just get someone else to deal with them or dispel them than it is to deal with them. They are not a guaranteed counter against the spellcaster by any means, as we covered earlier with the hard and soft counter idea. However, you must think about how you're going to engage them, and you must come up with a plan. Frequently, this is easier to do before the game starts when you're making your spell list. You can throw a heat weapon on there. You can put a stone form on there. You can make sure that you maybe bought a point of armor as a bard or playing Avatar of Nature as a druid. You just want to make sure you have something that helps you deal with a monk that's coming to attack you so that you're not helpless. If this means you have to make sure you have a dagger on you so that you're not standing there with no weapons and the monk comes around the corner and all you have are verbals, well, then you have to run away or die. And that's not a great spot to be in. That's not a spot we want to be in. So we're going to have to try and make sure that we have some sort of plan to deal with that monk. Scouts. Scouts are an interesting combination of kind of barbarian and assassin at a certain level, but they are their own class. They get 3 points of armor. They get most of the melee weapons when it comes to that because they get shorts, longs, and daggers. But they also can have a bow or crossbow or a shield, depending on the scout you're dealing with and what they want to do. They also have heavy thrones, so they have a number of ranged options, and ranged options are the best thing to deal with a spellcaster because that means that when they're pointing and shouting and they have to stand still because they have to do that as part of the incant, still targets are relatively easy to hit because they're not dodging. And if they do dodge, they stop casting. So it's a sort of win-win. They have a number of escape mechanics between Shadow Step and Adaptive Blessing and the ability to shoot you. Do be aware if you're playing Avatar of Nature and you've got a nice enchantment stack going that they do have a once per refresh Dispel Magic that has caught a number of people off guard when the scout actually dispels them. And sure, they only get 1 per refresh, but if they take a whole stack of enchantments with it, it was a good use. And odds are good that if you weren't expecting it, they also murdered you right after. And then finally, for the open class, we have warriors. They are the thing that most spellcasters are designed to hard counter. They have no innate immunity to verbals. That's the easiest way to get rid of them. If you have a sphere or an abeyance that they don't see coming, you can use that to ignore their armor. In general, it is a very poor trade to go in against a heavily armored warrior to try and beat them in melee without any other tricks to use. And you do want to keep an eye out for Shake It Off and True Grit because you can murder him with a verbal, turn around, and now 10 seconds later he pops right out, kills you back, scavenges back whatever damage he can, and goes about his day going, ha, take that, spellcaster, and that's not the position we want to be in either. And then we have the closed classes, which are Paladin and Anti-Paladin. Yes, I skipped all of the spellcasters. I'm aware of this. I want to talk about them individually. Anti-Paladins, 4 points of armor, so you can't get rid of all of their armor in a location with a single force bolt or lightning bolt, that sort of thing. If the armor is full, their only ranged weapon outside of a couple of verbals are javelins, so they're relatively easy to isolate using ranged abilities. However, they are immune to command and flame, so you want to be aware of that when you start using verbals and the occasional spell ball. You're not going to be able to knock out an anti-paladin by hitting them with a fireball, if I remember correctly. So there's that issue, and they do have a couple of melee abilities like Poison and Brutal Strike that are going to work well at shutting down an overconfident spellcaster. There's also the fact that to get there, you have to be a knight, which means they've probably been playing for a while, so they know how class interactions work, they know how to fight, and they're aware of the tricks you bring to the table, so they're going to be somewhat of a canny opponent. This also holds true for the opposite side of the coin, paladins. Paladins get a slightly more frustrating pair of immunities between command and death, particularly for most spellcasters to deal with. This especially holds true for bards. The fact that the paladin has the immunity to command and death pretty much ruins all of your day as a bard. And if you see them coming, you want to make sure that you have something like shove or stun handy to at least buy you room if they're not wearing protection from magic. That class alone heavily emphasizes the problem bards have with dealing individually with spellcasting and immunities because of their limited kit. But overall, I tend to see more anti-paladins and paladins on the field. That might just be my local meta, though. All right, so we've gone through all of the basic groundwork of playing a spellcaster. We've covered where do you stand, who do you target, why do you stand there, why do you target them, how do we look at those other classes that are not casters, and that sort of thing. So now we're going to cover the casters individually. We'll cover them in order of how much I like playing them, rather than alphabetically, just because I'm giving a lecture and that means I get to pick. So, my favorite spellcasting class is actually Healer. It's where I got my start. It's the one I enjoy the most. I feel like I'm actually more effective on the field as a healer than anything else, but I really, really, really enjoy playing support classes. I play them in just about everything from Overwatch to WoW to Amtgard. If you give me a class choice, the first thing I'm going to go ask you is which one is the support class. Healers do not get armor at all, ever, unless they get it from an outside source. They cannot enchant themselves like a druid can at certain points. They cannot purchase armor like a bard can. They are unarmored. However, they do get small and medium shields. They're relatively cheap. My personal preference is heavily anti-shield, mostly because I find them a somewhat inefficient pick, and they tend to encourage me to go up and fight. And once you are fighting in a line, particularly as a healer, your range is basically this guy here, and that guy there. And that's a waste of a whole lot of magic for very small amounts of influence. Your true bread and butter abilities as a healer tend to lie in your ability to remove states and pretty much reverse every negative power in the game, including death. From Resurrect and Greater Resurrect to Release and Greater Release, you do get Mend. You do have a little bit of trouble maintaining equipment because Mend is the only thing you get. Greater Mend and Word of Mending. Word of Mending don't show up on your list. It means that if someone is heavily damaged, it might be a better idea to find one of the other classes to send them to, or get really, really, really good at saying the charge incant very quickly so that you can recharge that mend in between every step. Your magic balls are pretty effective. You get Entangle, Ice Ball, and Abeyance. You're the only class in the game to get Abeyance. It's my favorite color. I love using it. It can be kind of oppressive if you get really good at it or use it at the very small scale, because stun is not a fun effect to have on yourself, particularly if no one is using it. Excuse me. You do want to note that every single one of those spell balls is subdual. If you're fighting a barbarian, unless you're just trying to distract them, don't bother throwing the spell ball at them. It's going to bounce off or miss and do absolutely nothing either way. Also be aware of barbarians who know about this, because you'll sometimes see the more self-aware and teamwork-oriented barbarians will put themselves in the line, and they'll lean forward and shield block or bat away your subdual spell balls from the person you're actually throwing at them. And since spell balls are discharged on the first target they hit, you run into the problem of, oh great, that barbarian is blocking my ability to effectively use spell balls in that entire area. He may not hit every one, but you do have to go get the spell ball to use it again. So you run into the issue of, okay, cool, I can throw a spell ball there, but what are the odds that that barbarian is going to bat it away? Abeyance has that problem for everyone who sees the spell ball coming, because it only affects them if it hits a solid area, unlike Ice Ball and Entangle, which are engulfing. So you must hit a legal target or a legal strike zone to get the Abeyance benefit. The upside is it ignores armor, which includes magic armor, so you don't really care if they have ancestral armor or anything like that, outside of some very limited effects that block anything bad, like, say, Blessed Aura or Blessing Against Harm, and anything that gives you blanket immunity to subdual. So if you can tag them with it, you've got a 60-second stun, which you can refresh forever, because that's how stun works pretty much. You can just keep refreshing it because you can affect them while they're in stun. Your verbals, you don't have too many offensive verbals. You do have Banish, which can actually make it really difficult for assassins and barbarians that are teleporting in to bomb the line to get close. You just keep sending them back home. It's not a perfect answer, but it is a pretty effective one, because it's effectively lost, but they put themselves in insubstantial for you. My absolute favorite spell for the healer is probably Greater Release. It is my opinion that every healer ever should have an experienced Greater Release on their list, outside of very, very weird battle games that make it so that you don't need Greater Release. But they have to be almost intentionally designed to overcome the power of Greater Release. Greater Release is both your most defensive and offensively used spell, just because of how versatile it is. It can remove one or all of the states you want from a target, and a number of effects, things like Elemental Barrage. That evoker giving your team a problem, cool, Greater Release. Now he's not an evoker, or at least he doesn't have Elemental Barrage anymore, so he has to actually incant every spell ball, and his rate of fire is much, much lower. Fight After Death Barbarian, Greater Release. Teleporting Assassin, Greater Release. Shadow Stepped Scout, Greater Release. Cursed Teammate who you need to resurrect, Greater Release. Frozen Teammate over there, Greater Release. I think we get the picture. Greater Release, pretty much usable almost anywhere on the battlefield. One of the interesting things is that a lot of times the spellcasters seem to have an A and B side of the coin, and you are the opposite side of the coin from the wizard. Healers are pretty much going to run around reversing a bunch of effects, while wizards are going to run around handing out a bunch of effects. Which leads me into my second most favorite spellcaster, Wizard. I originally tried playing Wizard when I started working towards Paragon on Wizard. As a support-oriented, I wanted to make use of those enchantments you don't see very often. Play a Wizard that was more defensively minded. And that sort of worked, but a lot of people didn't understand wizard enchantments because they're not used very often. A lot of people would rather have druid enchantments or a couple of the healer enchantments. So I ended up realizing that the best way for me to support my team as wizard was to find the thing that was giving my team problems and smoosh it. That warrior in 6-point armor with a golem stack on him, well, he gets dispelled and then frozen and then shattered and then cursed with Steel Life Essence and then probably shattered again or something like that, depending on what he's doing, just to make sure he's not coming back today. And so I started just finding the things that was giving my team trouble. If they were doing a large push, I'd move up and start crowd controlling the entire front line of that push. And then once the support characters came up to try and free the people that I had just crowd controlled, we just murdered them. Finger of Death, Fireball, lightning bolt, drag below, hold person, drag below, any of the death combos that I had packed onto that particular spell list, I didn't actually use them on the front line. I used them on the second line. You want that support element dead. As we talked about earlier, they're going to undo all of your hard work, and they deserve payment for undoing all that hard work, and that payment is death. You want them dead, you want them in respawn, you want them not undoing all the stuff you do. In general, I found the most powerful wizard build to be a battle mage build, which probably isn't terribly surprising to most people. My favorite was actually a no archetype at all build that utilized some spell balls and a number of kill conditions to just set up a variety of ways to deal with people. Battle mage counters are fairly well known. Warlocks have the issue of not getting dispel magic. I happen to be of the opinion that if you're playing wizard, you should be ready to remove enchantment stacks pretty consistently. And Warlock and Evoker have a bit of trouble with that since they lose access to dispel magic. Both of them can use phase, phase bolt, which is nice. They can at least reliably throw something at the person that has the enchantment stack, but getting rid of it is problematic. The reason Battle Mage works so strong, for those of you that aren't aware or didn't ever think about it, is besides the fact that they have access to all the wizard verbals, which are pretty nice, they also have access to unlimited ambulant. I didn't cover this earlier, but the largest weakness of a spellcaster is the fact that they must, one, stand still to use the vast majority of their abilities, and two, can only target one person at a time with the vast majority of their abilities. This means that if your enemy has to stay in one spot, say in a domination game, spellcasters are very, very, very good at coming up and destroying the entire defensive line, scattering the back elements, and helping your team push into that point. Conversely, they're pretty bad at defending that point. Unless you can cast very quickly or they're not being attacked by very many people, if you've got 5 spellcasters and 10 people attacking them, or even just 5 people attacking them, each spellcaster must agree to target a different person in order to affect all 5, and all the spellcasters have to stand still. So depending on the cardio of the people involved and how fast the spellcasters can cast, you can just rush them, and they either have to give ground so that they can find somewhere to stand and cast, or die if they don't cast fast enough to deal with the entire oncoming group of people. This is not true for battle mages because they can just walk and cast. So they can run around in a circle while casting at you while you're trying to chase them, and now you have to catch them before they spell you. And that's much less of a guaranteed option. You do want to note that because wizards have absolutely zero access to shields or armor, you are especially vulnerable to clouds of thrown weapons, arrows, spell balls, etc. So keep an eye out for the firing line of people that tend to form up just behind a battle line where they're just trying to throw shots over the line into the enemy field. Because if you become too obvious of a target and you're not very good at punch blocking and mending your weapon, or if it's an arrow or something like that, you're going to find out that you have nothing to defend yourself except for running away or escaping. You don't have a shield to block with or armor to take points on. My third favorite caster, and the one that actually I got last because it was the most difficult for me to master, is Bard. Bards have no ranged weapons at all. Unlike healers and wizards and druids, they get no spell balls. And unlike druids, they get no access to arrows or crossbows. So they have nothing that they can use to project power except for verbals. A monk is a problem for a bard, as is a paladin, because both of them are largely immune to everything the bard can do to them. There are things the bard can do to themselves that help them level that field between things like Song of Battle or Song of Survival. But there aren't very many things the bard can do to directly affect those two classes. Also true mostly for Barbarian, although at least there you have Tear. which you don't have the option of with the other two. You do get armor, though, or can purchase it. It's very expensive, and outside of very specific things, I didn't actually buy it. I was very excited to get it after playing the other three casters, and then found out I didn't use it very often, which was kind of a letdown. My default build turned into mostly a verbal with a one or two short swords, or a short sword and a small punch shield, depending on what I was trying to do. And you rely very, very, very heavily on command, and so you want to be aware of that also. And then finally, you will only be able to spell against one person. You can get more extensions than most people. I'm a little bit aggrieved over the fact that your extensions are limited, but those are the rules and that's how they work. You do have the special power of being able to restore people's abilities, either their per lives or their chargeable abilities, depending on which spells you take. And that is an absolutely fantastic power to have as a support character. It is just phenomenal, in my opinion, honestly. And even my most offensive verbal bard lists included at least the bare minimum package for dealing with recharging my friend's powers. You are also the only spellcaster who has absolutely no access to Dispel Magic, which is really, really, really frustrating when you were just working on Druid or Wizard or Healer, and the enchantment stack comes rolling in, and you're like, I guess I will organize my team to do something about that because I can't. Finally, Druid. Druid is my least favorite spellcasting class to play. They have the most powers. They're probably, and absolutely, in my opinion, the highest on the power scale in Amtgard. But I just don't. I don't like them. They don't have enough support abilities outside of enchantments, obviously, for me to really dig into them. They don't have enough offensive abilities for me to play the wizard style I like to play, and a lot of their higher end abilities are focused on making themselves more powerful. I'm not terribly interested in being a super powerful person on the field. I would rather take my entire team and make them great than make myself untouchable. I can only be in one spot. I can only deal with however many people I can verbal or hit at the same time. If I can empower my whole team, we can do that along the entire battle line, which is far more effective at achieving an objective than making myself some druidic god of destruction. I do like the enchantment powers they get. My default role and the one that I found most powerful and effective was actually to play a midfield support druid to kind of mix together both wizard and healer. I would release mend and heal people while also replacing enchantments mid-battle, which frustrated people because I wouldn't send out my full stacks all the time right at the start. And so they would dispel some of my mid-tier enchantments, and I would, in the middle of the battle, be behind the person, replacing my enchantments on them as they were fighting. And so, I thought I just dispelled your stone skin. Nope, I put it back on. Have a nice day. I don't really care. I'm just going to keep adding them. I took Summoner. I have some spell balls. I have some support abilities. I have a stick. I'm just going to deal with that. Now, I would be somewhat remiss if I did not discuss the other ways to play Druid. You can absolutely play Avatar in Nature. Avatar in Nature is an exceptionally powerful archetype. It breaks the primary rule of enchantments, which is you cannot place good enchantments on yourself. And I'm pretty sure most people that have played, but if you're new, you may not know what's going on there. It basically allows the druid to use most of their mid and low level enchantments on themselves and continue fighting that way. So that's how they get magical armor from themselves. They get a number of attack abilities, some defensive abilities, and they still retain access to most of their most of their kit outside of points they spend on those enchantments, they can still use verbals and spell balls and equipment. Ranger is the other one. It makes enchantments more expensive, but if you're really good with equipment and fighting, particularly bows, because it allows access for bow on a spellcaster, you can kind of rain down non-special arrows, just mundane arrows, but those are still powerful. 1 point of damage, pounces count, armor breaking, etc. But weapon destroying, if I remember correctly, as long as the weapon's not hardened, that sort of thing. And then if they get close, you have all of the wizard verbals from Ice Ball, well, that's a spell ball, but from Stone Form to Icy Blast to Dispel Magic, that sort of thing. And then paradoxically, druids are kind of the best countered druids. You see more druid enchantments out there than anything else. And druids get naturalized magic, which is a number of very fast casting dispel magics in a set of 5. And so you can just clear out the enemy druid enchantments. That is the secondary component of me playing a support druid, was just popping up with naturalized magic from the back line or the second line, dispelling a chain of people and moving on. All right, so we've covered basically all of the classes in Amtgard from my perspective as spellcaster. We've covered my base groundwork of how I deal with spellcasting and how I function on the field. I'd like to open it up to some questions here, and if we don't get some, I'll figure something else to talk about. I might go more in depth about some spells and stuff like that. Want to go ahead and start asking some questions if you have them, folks. I think we had one already. That was from, I think that's Mort. Oh, hi, Mort. That's from Mort. Good positional thingies for skirmishers. Any general rules of thumb? When I play a spellcaster and I join a skirmish group, I normally try and make sure that we are relatively close to the front line, not necessarily directly adjacent to it, but close enough that if we need to run back to a larger concentration of people, we can. And then you want to make sure that you're attacking from an angle that is partially shielded. So if the front line is here, you don't want to be way over here. You might want to be here-ish so that you can come in sideways, but you're not so far away from this line that you can't come back. Dealing with Albie. So this goes back to my popular player thing. Albie is actually one of the people I had in mind when I wrote about that section. I have a manual that I wrote up for the Paragon Academy. You can find it posted there in all of the spellcasting material channels, or you can email me and I'll email it back to you. I'll talk to Wenjo about posting it somewhere that we can get access to it. I think I can post it to the Facebook group for this event. But he is very popular, particularly in the northern portion of the Emerald Hills. People like to challenge him. He's the largest fish in the pond up here, generally speaking, when I started playing. And people would want to fight him just because. So I just went and got my ice ball and kept throwing it at him. And since he was frozen, nobody could attack him effectively, and the wizards weren't really worried about him anyways. And I could generally get my team to go past that player now that he was unable to be interacted with, and they would go attack the objective. Do note that as Bjorn points out there, that it does make people mad. They will feel targeted, they will feel upset, and if they don't understand what you're doing and why you're doing, you may need to talk to them. And sometimes it might be better just to murder them so they can go respawn, come back, and have some fun playing the game too. But honestly, that depends on where we're at. If I'm at a kingdom level event or an inter-kingdom level event and we're playing and I'm trying to play hard and have fun and show what I can do in a class, I'm probably going to do my level best to get the most effective for my team that game answer out of it. But if we're at the park level or we're just practicing or it's just for funsies thing, you don't want to lock someone down that hard because it's not fun. And if nobody's having fun, then you don't get to play because they stop playing. And that's something to look out for. The fact that, as I was talking about at the very beginning of the lecture, that spellcasters have a hidden ability list that people can't see from the outside, you can't deal with. They don't know what's going to happen. Yes, Bjorn is correct. Icy Blast Shatter, outside of a couple of things like Enlightened Soul. Let's see, it's sorcery, so it's the wizard enchantment, Void Touched. Outside of things like that, adaptive protection, promag, icy blast, blow shatter, as I'm sure people know, using that is a great way to pick someone out of the back line or midline or even the front line, depending on where you're standing, and eliminate them quickly. Something to look out for is if they have a healer nearby. I have been on both sides of this coin. I have icy blasted, shattered someone, only to have them be swift rezzed immediately after and sent after me unexpectedly, and I've done the same. You do not want to be, you don't want to icy blast shatter someone and not pay attention to what's around them. That includes druids, because they do get resurrect. It's kind of expensive, you don't see it often, but you want to pay attention to them. Otherwise, if it's not a druid or a healer, the monk can resurrect them, but that takes a while because they've got to go through the entire incant, that sort of thing. I think there's a delay, but I'll give people a minute or two to get some more questions into chat. All right. So, yes, Mort? That's a statement, not a question. Okay. If you want to stop an upper end caster as a non-caster, the easiest way to do it, honestly, is bring two people. 3 or 4 is probably better, but 2 people is going to give you a running chance. If you both just charge straight at the caster, a couple of things are going to happen. They're going to run away, which kind of achieves your objective depending on what it was. A lot of casters, if they see 2 people charging hard at them, they know they can deal with one person quickly, but maybe not the second one before they get hit, and most casters are unarmored. So they're going to swift teleport, circle of protection, stone form, whatever their preferred escape mechanism is, they're going to use it. Song of Survival for the Bard or Self Lost. That's something to watch people get confused on. They come charging in and you use the Lost incant and they go, you must declare an target. That didn't count. I was the target. I lost myself. I don't want to be here anymore. Goodbye. They're going to activate that. If they have a spell ball handy, you might want to bring a third person because they could conceivably chunk the spell ball. It hits one of you, then they verbal the other one. And then if they're also good at stick, you're going to have a bigger problem because they might go, okay, cool, I'll spell that guy, and I'm just going to fight this other one. So it's a little bit variable there depending on who it is you're dealing with. But if they're a primarily caster skill focused person, you're going to want to just bring 2 or 3 people and charge them is the absolute easiest way. Outside of that, an ambulance extension spell from outside their range that you finish right at the 50-foot mark is a good way to deal with the spellcaster. Arrows thrown, startling them. So experienced casters are going to be very practiced in rattling off their incant, but if you can startle them badly enough that they involuntarily take a step or flub their incant, those are both very good ways to deal with them. Even something as simple as, everybody charge, and they charge, and the spellcaster reflexively takes 2 steps backwards. Hey, look, interrupted spell gives you more time to close. You can kind of set a trap for them, give them a juicy target when they pop up to do what everybody else turns around and uses a verbal back on them, because everybody's verbals are relatively the same range. They're either 20 or 50 feet. So if they're arranged to spell you, you're arranged to spell them. All right. The only other thing I wanted to cover was enchantments. I'm going to cover that fairly quickly because I only have about 10 or 15 minutes left. There are 2 primary enchanting focused archetypes. one for healer called Warder, and the other one for druids called Summoner. In general, if you're trying to pick a class to play that is going to get more mileage out of enchantments, you're going to go with a Summoner. They get access to more offensive abilities while they have Summoner, and their enchantments are broadly applicable. This is important because they're the class that hands out the armor enchantments and a couple of other special enchantments like Gift of Water, not Flame Blade, Gift of Fire, Lycanthropy, things that have multiple aspects to the enchantment. So it's going to be easier to find people to enchant. Warder is going to have less offensive power, but you have a pretty good selection of narrowly powerful abilities. They're very narrowly powerful, but in the area that they are good at, they are the top of the chain for that very specific enchantment type. And then you have to figure out who you want to give it to. They do get more access to persistent. The healers get per life persistent. So if you have a bard handy that can return your per lives, you can basically make all of your healer enchantments persistent, which is pretty cool. Or if there are battle game respawn mechanics you can manipulate, I don't like advocating for you to do that, but it is something to be aware of, particularly if someone on the other side of the field is doing so. In an instant respawn game, I can persistent enlighten soul you, call dead, respawn, get my persistent back, persistent enlighten soul the buddy next to you, call dead, respawn, get my persistent back. You see the loop. For both of those classes, and also for wizard with the rare enchantment they like to throw out, you want to know who you're enchanting. At the Interkingdom level, that's a little bit more difficult, but at the Kingdom level, you get a pretty good feel if you go to the events consistently, which people are really good at the game there and which ones are mediocre or new, that sort of thing. And you want to hand out enchantments to people that know how they work. Like it's great to give a newbie Iron Skin. They've got 2 points of AA. They're not encumbered. They didn't have to buy armor. They're now much more difficult to kill. And he forgets how to use it, calls deadly enchantment. Gone. Or he doesn't know that it doesn't actually make him invulnerable, so he runs in, gets murdered, and is confused. Or he just doesn't understand how enchantments that give armor and ancestral armor function. And now you're looking at the case of, hey, look, that person I enchanted is using that completely wrong, and now everybody's frustrated, and he's frustrated at me because I gave them an ability that they didn't know how to use. Same thing with healer. You want to make sure that whoever you hand an enchantment to is going to remember to use it instead of just calling dead, and they're not going to be confused by that ability. That is most of the time I have left. I have a few more minutes for some more questions if anybody has some. After that last bit there, I had realized I hadn't really covered enchantments and how important it is to make sure the person that you're enchanting knows how they work. You should know how they work, you're casting. And yeah, it's a not universal. Sometimes everyone forgets them sometimes. Same thing when you're wearing armor. You're like 1, 2, dead. Oh wait, that wasn't an armor breaking shot. I'm not actually dead. Oops, sorry. It's just a mental thing you have to get used to. But if you know there's a person that never remembers their enchantments, why are we giving them enchantments? They're not going to call the enchantment. You might as well just have thrown that magic point or half point, however much it costs for the enchantment that you cast away, because they're not using it. So which means you're not using it either. Well, if we don't have any more questions, yeah. If we don't have any more questions, that's going to be it for me. Like I said, if you have additional questions, My name is the same on Facebook. It's Andrew Maher, as it was introduced. I think that was posted as who was doing the lecture on the event. Alternatively, my email is the same as my character name, Mabtik at Gmail, so you can email me there. Either of those work. On Discord, my username is Mabtik, or I'm on the Paragon Academy. There's a number of ways for you to reach out to me privately if you don't want to ask a question in a public forum. I'm more than happy to talk about spellcasters absolutely all day. It's my favorite part of the game. I really enjoy relatively complex mechanics, so I'm more than happy to talk about them with you. And thanks for your time, everybody. I hope you learned something, or at least developed something new that will help you play casters on the field. Next time we get to talk.
Thank you, Mabtik. All right, everyone, spam some emojis one more time for Mabtik the Magnificent, who filled that time slot very, very nicely. On behalf of, I guess, myself and, the rest of the staff, we are so happy to have you come out all this way to give such an awesome class. Thank you very much.